The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are my own or those of my guests, and in no way represent the views of the company or companies that I or we work for. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they are told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident. You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast dedicated to the journey and the challenges surrounding the life and career of Aviator Tony, an airline pilot currently flying for a legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. This is episode 15 of Squawk Ident, recorded on the 19th of December, 2019, from the Aviator Studios somewhere in Southern California. On this episode of Squawk Ident, Aviator Tony is joined in studio with a guest that we first introduced in episode 8, where we highlighted the journey of a young pilot who has had his share of challenges within his career in aviation thus far. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Captain Roger will be joining us today to discuss what can go wrong on the line. It's not always textbook. From FADEC failures to abnormalities, BFRs, CFIs, pilot errors, and more. All on this episode of Squawk Ident. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Right after a brief word from our sponsors. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Well, here we are. Episode 15 is in the books. I can't believe we've been on this journey together now for about 3 months. This has been an amazing feat to produce the show and every week sit down and talk to all of you about the journey that this aviator has gone through. Well, this past week has been quite an adventure. We got back from our trip from Albuquerque, where we sat down with family, and I had the distinct opportunity to sit down with my stepfather-in-law, who is an absolute amazing 83-year young Navy veteran. And that was in episode 14. His journey has been just a very interesting and very honorable thing to talk about. And this week, after settling back into the groove back at home and dealing with all the holiday hubbub, I actually had an in-studio guest, a very dear friend. You may recognize him from episode 8. Mr. Captain Roger came in studio and sat down with me, and we got to talk a little bit about emergencies, procedures, the differences between the more corporate world and the airline world, and even in the general aviation world, the things that we had to deal with as CFIs. We spoke a little bit about procedures, policies, and even pilot errors. So please sit back, relax, enjoy the audio from our session together here at the Aviator Studios. We are very fortunate to have in studio a former guest of the show, Captain Roger. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back again.
Absolutely. And it is absolutely a pleasure to have you here in studio. And we'd like to talk a little bit today about things that happen on the line and a little bit of our adventures and our journey thus far. We've had a relatively positive feedback from the show that we did together. Was it episode, I think, 8 or 9?
I was going to say it was 8, I thought.
Yeah,
but...
I think 8. And you had, really some pretty amazing things we were talking about earlier today happened to you with a bird strike. And that happened at 10,000 feet over Sholo. It was a pretty dramatic experience, was it not?
That was hopefully about as dramatic as it can get. I've been fairly fortunate myself, actually, to not have had a number of incidents. However, I kind of feel like I got the big one out of the way, and maybe that that counteracts the lack of little things.
Yeah, you've reached your quota.
I hope I've reached my quota. At the same time, it's like, statistics would say that happens once, it won't happen again. But at the same time, I know it can happen.
And there are those that have been hit by lightning or struck by lightning multiple times.
Yeah, exactly.
So I hope and I pray that that is the most dramatic and dangerous thing that happens to you in your career.
Go start finding a piece of wood to knock on.
That's it. So a little bit about this show. Episode 15, we're going to talk a little bit about what can go wrong. Both with general aviation and airline experiences, and how it's not always textbook in the recovery of those procedures. We train, as we mentioned a couple episodes ago, for legacy airlines every 9 months. Previously, I was with a carrier where every 6 months we went into recurrent training. So we were constantly doing retraining on things like engine fires, engine failures, stalls, procedures that can come up where your actions must be swift, almost a muscle memory action to help prevent a dangerous situation. But most of the time, those are not the type of emergencies we have. We have emergencies or maybe just precautionary events happening where we have to react and think. And sometimes things happen and really they're not the fault of a mechanical issue. Is just that we missed something.
In the end, pilot error is usually going to be the culprit to at least a certain degree.
And
sure.
Those kind of things happen to all of us pilots
with regularity.
And any pilot that tells you, "Well, I've never made a mistake," they're lying.
Lying.
They're lying to themselves. They're lying to us. They're lying to you. So, we all make mistakes. We're human. That's why for major operations, there's usually 2 pilots required, especially on a type-rated aircraft. Right?
Absolutely.
So, I've had some experiences, and I don't know, maybe we'll start out with an experience I had where I ended up getting stuck in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Lovely place.
Yes, which is dubbed the Electric City.
I did not know that.
Yeah, Scranton, PA. And did you know why?
I have no idea.
I had no idea either, but when you're stuck there for a day or two, nothing to do.
You got some time.
You got some time on your hands. And you start visiting, local landmarks and museums and whatnot, and you start reading these plaques on the walls of buildings, and you find out things like Scranton, Pennsylvania was the first city in the continental U.S. to put in an electric rail car, streetcar. Before then, streetcars were pulled by horses, usually 2 or 4 horses pulling a streetcar. And this was the public transportation of the time, for a nickel or a shilling or whatever the hell,
shilling
or whatever the hell it was, the monetary least expensive thing. I don't know. We still have pennies right now, but
2 bits.
Yeah, maybe a bit or 2 bits. Yeah, not a bite, but a bit. So you would ride these streetcars, and of course, in the back of the streetcar was the 5 or 6-year-old kid that was working with a shovel and a broom, and he'd pick up the horse crap because he didn't want horse crap in the middle of the street. And of course, this was not really technologically advanced. So Philadelphia, I don't know who invented it, and I don't know who the developer was, but someone decided, hey, let's put electrical wires suspended over these rail lines that are in the middle of the street. Let's make the ground on the rail, and let's bring positive energy on top, and we'll have an electric streetcar. And that's why Scranton, Pennsylvania is the Electric City.
And without these incidents, we would have never known that.
I would have never known that. I guess I could do homework, but, So we're talking about why I got stuck there. And this happened, it's got to be over a decade ago. So I was flying for the regional airline that I used to fly for. And I flew with a really cool guy, a captain who I've flown with quite a bit before. And we were flying out of Chicago, and it was a Sunday morning, and it was one of those things where it was, okay, 1 leg to Scranton, a quick turn, 1 leg back, and then I was going home. And I was supposed to be going home by like the 1 o'clock flight. So get me in by, late afternoon, early evening, just in time for dinner. And so we take off, and it was my leg to fly. So once we got lined up on the runway, I remember it was 3-2 left, Tango 10, which no longer exists at Chicago O'Hare.
Is no longer there.
Yeah, but 3-2 left, Tango 10 intersection, and we're clear for takeoff. He says, "All right, your aircraft, my aircraft." I set the thrust, and his response for that airline was thrust set, and we're accelerating through 80 knots, and he says 80. I said check, and he goes, "Huh?" And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Never mind, just keep going." So okay, he notices something that's not crucial, but is an issue. So we keep going, V1 rotate, we take off, we're climbing out, and as we're climbing up, he says, I always, in that aircraft, it was an Embraer 145, in that aircraft, after an engine start, the procedure was to reset and alternate the FADEC. The FADEC is the full authority digital engine control
Correct.
computer. Okay, so each engine has an A and a B, so 2 FADECs. And they talk to each other consistently. So whichever one is working, it's comparing its data with the other. And you have 2 engines, so you have 4 FADECs on the aircraft. And we already had a FADEC MEL'd where one of the aspects of that controller was inoperative. And you could still go because it was talking to the other FADEC continuously. So it would compare notes and it would use the data that it felt was more accurate. And don't quote me on that verbiage, but that's basically from my understanding. So you could still continue. And so we knew that was an issue, but we took off in it. And he goes, I always reset and alternate the FADEC so that after both engines are started, the engine instrumentation or the engine warning display would indicate AA or BB. So in the event that the FADEC had an issue, it would automatically alternate from A to B because you were on the same aircraft at your regional. So
we did the same thing. We had A for away and B for back. So we would always be on, when we went away from the hub, we were on FADEC A, and when we went back to the hub, we were on FADEC B, and they were always agreeing with each other.
I wish I would have known that years ago. That's awesome. So we take off, and he says, I don't know if I reset them to be A and A or B and B. He goes, it's just such a muscle memory at this point in my career that I've been doing this for so long that, I do it automatically, instinctually. And I don't know if I did that. And the issue is right now, our aircraft says engine 1, FADEC A, engine 2, FADEC B. And I said, well, if you don't remember if you did that, we don't know if it automatically switched, which there is no pilot indication that it did that. It just does it automatically. And unless there's a major fault, then you would have been notified through the warning display, the ECAM. So we continued, not thinking anything of it. About 45 minutes into the flight, we're in cruise, autopilot's on, we're fat, dumb, and happy, and we get to a waypoint, and the airplane does a little bit of a roll because it needs to turn direction about 20 degrees, changing course. The autopilot's connected, so it's doing its thing, and all of a sudden, we get a good yaw, where it just felt like somebody stepped on the rudder. And the captain says to me, are you messing with the rudder? I said, no, my feet are on the floor, man. He's like, oh, did you feel that? I said, yeah, I did. So we're looking around, looking at the engine instruments, and we notice that the N1 fan bug on the right engine was alternating about 10%, 15%, just up, down, up, down, up, down. It didn't stay steady like it was supposed to, like the number 1 engine. And so as we start noticing this, he looked at me and he goes, well, this is not right. I said, I agree. We should probably consult the book, the manual, the red book at the time. Did you guys have a red book, or what did you guys call it? AOM?
We called it the QRH.
Oh, you guys had a QRH in the cockpit? Yeah, we had, we didn't have a QRH in the cockpit. The company had just your book you had to go to.
We had a QRH or a QRC. I honestly don't remember. Different companies were calling them different things, and I think it might have even changed names that we were supposed to pretty much consult for anything and everything that went wrong.
Yeah, at Legacy we use a QRC, the Quick Reference Card, which there are 2 in the cockpit, 1 on each side of the pedestal. The captain has one and the first officer has one. And in the event that something happens, the very first thing instinctually is the pilot flying says, "My aircraft." And that's a new thing for us as well. And the pilot monitoring just reiterates, okay, someone's flying the plane. The person flying the plane is, the person that said, "My aircraft." And then the person flying the plane would call for the QRC. Now, a QRH is a quick reference handbook, right? So the handbook, I just keep knocking my microphone here. The handbook is a little bit more detailed. It has checklists and flows and emergency procedures to follow. We didn't have that. We had our memory items, and we had a checklist that was physically in our possession in our kit bags. So we went through the checklist and and we couldn't find anything that said sporadic into, a bug. That's what we're looking. That's what we had. That's what we were thinking. Oh, so we're looking through it. He's going through the index. N1 target bug, anything, nothing. Couldn't find anything to indicate that's what we had. And what's the checklist? What's the procedure? Because this was new for both of us. And as he's thumbing through, about a minute into this, I'm keeping an eye on it. It's basically like an engine running rough. So it's up and down, up and down, up and down. We're still putzing along. And just then, the number 2 engine just goes to flight idle by itself. And we didn't have auto throttles or auto thrust. We had manual, because I think you had the same. So it was in the cruise, detent or whatever it was back then. I forget. And shouldn't have done that. So I immediately kicked off the autopilot and reiterated my aircraft. And put in the appropriate rudder to maintain coordinated flight. But of course, there was a pretty big yaw because it happened suddenly. And just as I'm saying that, now we get ding from the flight attendant and say, "Guys, what's going on up there?
What are you guys doing?
What's going on? It feels like we're flying cricket." So captain says, "I'll call you back. We're dealing with an engine issue." So he hangs up with them, and just as it goes to idle, it sits there for maybe a second or two, and whoop, it comes right back up. And now it's in the detent. It's in the bug. The bug is consistent. It's steady. It's not moving around. And we're just like looking at it going, okay, don't touch anything, he says to me. Don't, just turn on the autopilot and don't touch it. I'm like, okay, I agreed. So turn on the autopilot. And, we're both, our hearts are beating because we're like, something's going on. Are we losing an engine here? I mean, it's not a fire. It's not failure. It's not any of the thing. We are taught Ford. I don't know what you guys were taught back then. Fire, oil, rotation, or damage.
I never heard that.
Yeah. So if you have an engine problem, you're taught Ford. And so we're like, well, we don't have any of the FORD. So maybe it's a FADEC problem. Maybe something's wrong with the FADEC. But the one that was MEL'd was engine 1. FADEC A and engine 1. The engine 2 didn't have that MEL on either FADEC, I believe. So it was weird. And he says, "You know what? Just continue to fly. You start looking at airports that we can possibly divert to. I'm going to pick up my handset. I'm going to call SOC, have them patch us through to maintenance." SOC is Systems Operation Control, for those of you who never heard that. And we're going to call MOC, which is Maintenance Operation Control. So through there, we did a kind of like a foam patch in the air. And we're telling maintenance what's going on. And they said, well, okay, you've got a FADEC failure issue. That's what's causing this. Look up the checklist, FADEC failure. And so, oh, okay, now we have a checklist we can refer to. So we did. And it said, to do not reset the faults, just alternate it and see if it changes. If it doesn't change it, if it stays on the same FADEC, it means the other one has failed. And that's exactly what had happened. And they said, okay, well, why don't you come back to Chicago? And at this point, we were already more than halfway through our journey. And I started looking at, distance, fuel, winds. What's the weather in Chicago? Oh, it's snowing. And that means we would need an alternate because the weather conditions are less than BFR and requires an alternate. We just don't have the fuel for that. And the captain agreed. So he says, no, we're not going to do that. We don't have fuel for that. He goes, well, you want us to put it down somewhere else? You want us to divert to JFK or, something on the East Coast where there's a maintenance hub for our particular airline. And I said, no, you can continue to Scranton, I guess, but just know it's a Sunday morning and we have no contract maintenance on Sunday morning. You'll have to wait till Monday.
So you go to Scranton, you're going to stay there.
So you're going to stay there. Exactly. So we looked at each other and we said, well, if we can continue safely and it doesn't happen again, let's just continue to Scranton. If it happens again, we're not going to continue. We're going to land at the nearest suitable airport. And the captain said, yeah, I agree 100%. So we're talking back and forth about it, trying to figure out the best, safest solution. And what ended up happening was we continued to Scranton. Now, we were taking precautions on what ifs on the whole way there. Okay, what airport's closest? If we have it happen right now, where are we going? Oh, we're going to Albany. Okay. Or if it happens right now, where are we going? Oh, we're going on White Plains, whatever. So we were calculating emergency stops every 10 to 15 minutes the rest of the flight. And we were also debating if we come down on final. He says, you're flying, you're doing a great job, just continue to fly. If we're coming down on final and you bring the thrust levers back and the engine doesn't roll back because the FADEC possibly won't allow it, then we're just going to have to go through the procedure and shut down that engine, which on a descent, shut down an engine, really the only issue is in case you have to do a go around, right? So we ended up landing normally. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was like flying a normal flight. And as we touched down, we have an inhibition where any ECAM message that is not crucial is inhibited until after landing. And as soon as that time frame elapsed, I think it was 15 seconds after landing. I don't have the manuals anymore, but we get ding, engine 1 and 2, no dispatch, meaning all 4 FADECs have failed. All 4 FADECs had issues that were redundant issues, and therefore you're done. So we ended up in Scranton for 32 hours.
Enough time to find out how it's the Electric City.
Yeah, so here we are in Scranton. It's raining. They put us up in a hotel downtown. It was actually an old railway building. I forget the name of the hotel, but it's a beautiful, beautiful architecture. Over 100-year-old building that they converted to this fancy hotel. So we're there and we're like, okay, now what? We got all day Sunday. What do you want to do? My captain's like, well, I really like trains and they have a really cool train museum here. It's like, okay. He's like, hey man, don't worry about it. It's like $6 entry to get in. I'll pay for the entry. Let's just go. Just come with me. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. I don't really care about trains, but I'll go. It's better than sitting in your hotel room watching movies you've seen 100 times, right? So we ended up going to the train museum, and that's where I learned about the Electric City. So 17 minutes of talking about the Electric City. So, these things happen, right? And how we react to them sometimes goes down pretty much textbook, even if it's not clear cut. And other times...
And realistically speaking, I think that, and part of it might just be my experience. Most of the time they don't go down textbook. And this particular example was just one example of that, on how you had an abnormality on the flight deck and your first inclination is to go to the manual. Except what are you looking for when you go to the manual? Well, my N1 bug is jumping around. That N1 bug jumping around doesn't show up in any manual anywhere. And so you're left to kind of on your own devices, if you will. And as much as, especially in my experience, the airline world is much more, and rightfully so, is much more structured in that way than the environment that I actually fly in now. That's one of the biggest differences, how structured everything is. And they pretty much tell you, it's almost like the airlines try and take pilot making decision away from you in a lot of times.
It really is, yeah.
Is that we don't want you to think, we just want you, if you experience this, go to the manual and we're going to tell you what to do. You, again, your example, this happened and what do we do? Well, we called somebody else to tell us what to do. Whereas in the corporate world that I fly in, we don't have any of that. Everything is kind of left to us, and I'll be, very, quite frankly, in those kinds of things now, the first thing we don't do is think about checklists. It's more of a fly the airplane. Is everybody safe? Where should we go? What do we do next? And then kind of the checklist almost comes up at the last thing. It's a little bit more simplistic now, also, depending on the plane that you're flying. I mean, for instance, like you talked about some memory items.
Mm-hmm.
You know how many memory items we have in the 7X?
No.
3.
Engine fire?
No.
That's not even a memory item.
And actually, if you want to go down that road, if you have an engine failure, you know what kind of abnormality that is? An abnormality. It's not even an emergency procedure.
Yeah.
Now, we have 3 engines, but that thing will still climb at 2,500 feet per minute off the ground, with an engine failure. And so it's not even considered an emergency. But they're very actually benign things. One of our memory items is actually, because we control everything with basically a mouse, is if the mouse fails, of which the memory item, just as an example, is to simply switch to the other channel, which is flipping one switch right under the mouse. And that's our memory item.
And just for our listeners, what aircraft is this from?
This is a Falcon 7X.
Falcon 7X. And seats how many people?
Well, that kind of depends on the configuration, because we fly it in a corporate. I think it's certified up to 19 passengers.
Oh, wow. That's
pretty
good.
Nobody ever... I mean, it's a 70,000 pound max gross weight airplane. But nobody ever has them configured like that. I mean, usually we're flying, anywhere from 2 to maybe 8 passengers. But
yeah, you got like sofas and tables and
correct.
stuff.
We got sofas and tables. It's a very
luxurious.
different environment than the airlines. And like I say, that's one example. Like our checklists are also electronic. We have something go wrong in the airplane. The airplane, pops up on our CAS. And then it says, well, we go to the abnormal, which the aircraft already knows because it's in the CAS. And then we use a little toggle switch and it tells us what to do.
Nice.
So that makes everything easier.
So you're not fumbling looking for checklist paper.
We don't deal with any paper. Our normal checklists are all electronic. Our emergencies are all electronic. And we don't even need to look for anything because it says right there.
Wow.
And you might remember all those if statements within the checklist that are the bane of all of our existence when we go for our check rides in the simulator.
Boolean logic or something like that. Yeah.
Because you inevitably miss something. We don't have to really deal with that either because it's very straightforward, all electronic.
Nice. Yeah, I've been in the cockpit of a 7-8, commuting back and forth as I did.
Same principles.
Very, very similar. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and the Airbus, I've got to admit, the 320 family Airbus has what we call ECAM, and it does have that. However, at Legacy, you always check the QRC and find out if the emergency or annunciation is a quick reference or quick action item or ECAM exception item. And then you would do ECAM actions. So if we had something pop up on the ECAM or the engine warning display, then like your aircraft, the Falcon, we have that checklist electronically as well. However, in this little bubble, they don't want us to really diagnose issues. They just want us to always do the same thing every time consistently. That way, whatever happens, you're always doing the same thing. You're not doing something different. So it's always, is it a quick action? Meaning I have to do this now before I consult a checklist. Or is it an ECAM exception, which on the ground, a couple things can pop up where you're not going to follow the ECAM because it could be an anomaly. Right. And because it's a common anomaly, they don't want you to do those ECAM actions. They want you to do the exception checklist. So usually, I think it's like 6 or 7 or I think at the most 10 items on each one. And if it's not there, then the captain determines who's going to fly the airplane. So if the captain was flying and he decides, I'm going to go through these checklists, so your aircraft, and then the FO would say my aircraft, and then the captain would then look at you and you're supposed to say, okay, ECAM actions. And then he would read through, or she would read through the ECAM actions, and then you have to verify with each other. And it's a very
structured environment that the airlines have, and you follow kind of what you just alluded to is you've got so many different airplanes and so many different crews, but they can virtually come as close as possible to making sure that all of you guys are going to do the exact same thing at the exact same time if you have the exact same issue. Obviously, that will never happen completely, but they're coming as close as they possibly can. Whereas us, we have, we fly 2 different airplanes. But it's just there's 2 pilots. There's me, and then there's the other guy, and then are we flying airplane A? Are we flying airplane B? And it's much more of a, I guess I'd use the word practical application to it.
Sure.
Where how do we get from point A to point B safely? And the other thing that you were talking about that I think, in my opinion, is the most important thing, you're always thinking about, you never really know what's going to happen, especially in that instance that you had. But if this does happen, what are we going to do?
Right.
Here, this is where we are. This is what the plan is, so that if things do go even more sideways, you know exactly what you're going to do. And in the end, that's the most important thing, no matter what airplane you're flying, no matter how many engines it has, but knowing what you're going to do if things start to go really sideways, especially when you're talking about losing an engine, or engines doing funny things, because that's when you can just get yourself backed up into a corner, and that's where you don't want to end up.
Right. And all these experiences we have, either corporate world or in the airline environment, which is a little bit more of a bubble, as we're talking about here, we all started in the same place. Every single pilot started flying a 2-seater or 4-seater piston-powered general aviation aircraft. That's how you learn. Your first flight or your 100th flight, or however long it took, or however your path allowed you to progress in aviation, we all started in GA. And I think issues arise a little bit faster, a little bit more frequently in the GA world for some reason than they do in an airline world, because it's so structured, or a corporate world, because there's a lot of checks and balances and type ratings, and you, to fly people around for compensation, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. But in the GA world, as a private pilot, you don't have those hoops to jump through. At least they're not as stringent.
And with the 2 pilots, and quite frankly, a turbine powered airplane or a turbine powered engine is much more reliable than the piston powered airplanes too.
Yeah.
So now you've got the reliability of the engines. You've got the second pilot. Why is it that they start us in GA on a scarier airplane than a jet? I don't know what it would be like to go fly a piston powered airplane anymore. And you work up, and it's actually easier in a lot of ways. The thought processes obviously have to happen faster in a jet because things happen at 4 times the speed. But
yeah,
in a lot of ways, flying GA is, in my opinion, a lot more difficult than the airline world.
It is, and especially when you're new. And there have been many debates on both forums for aviation and general aviation, and instructor forums, and other podcasts that I've listened to about aviation that I try to listen to. And they always have the same kind of argument. Somebody will call in or write in and say, why is it that my flight instructor in the GA world is some young kid who's fresh out of flight school, and not some World War II vet that's been flying airplanes for 100 years? And, I should have the experience, because by definition, learning is a change of behavior by result of experience. And how can I get that training from a young person? And I think the best argument for that is that it really doesn't matter too much how old the instructor is or how much experience they have, because there are those with little experience that are absolutely phenomenal. Great teachers, very thorough, very technical, and they always promote good habits, good technique, good behaviors. Whereas you can have someone who's a retired airline, check airman, highest instructor level that there might be at an airline, flying heavies around for more than 20 years of their life, and now they're decide, well, I'm going to go flight instruct because I have all this experience. But they've also seen a lot, and to them it's no big deal, so you don't need to know that, or the instruction you got might not be.
Well, and the applicability of a lot of that stuff is also not going to benefit the new pilot to a large degree. I don't think a lot of the things that happen in the airline world, or that a check airman on a heavy flying, transoceanic routes, a lot of that won't apply to a brand new GA guy, or, even again, that turbine to piston, the thought processes are going to be different, and the way your outs are going to be different. The emergencies that happen on a transoceanic, while obviously, as you've kind of talked about, flying to Hawaii, I mean, those are big deals, but they're also not applicable to a brand new GA pilot who's trying to figure out how to solo and just wants to go visit, visit grandma for the weekend.
You just start talking about that on the flight line, so they get impressed.
And they will be.
And they will. But, we've all kind of started in this GA world, and we've all we were talking about it at the onset of the show, how, we're humans and we make human errors and pilot errors. And I can remember making quite a few situations where I could have went better. I should have done things a little differently. And I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, but I can remember a pretty quick story here. We were working together. Actually, it was at Tailwind there at Chandler, and the boss called me in the office one morning and said, "Hey, all the instructors are with students right now. I've got a friend. He's a retired sheriff from here in the area, and he owns an airplane. It's a Mooney. It's in the shop next door, and they just put a 3-bladed Herzl prop on it. And so it's coming out of maintenance. They're still working on the logbooks, but I've got reassuring information that it's all completed and the paperwork's finalized. You just need to go over there and take a look at the logbook before you go. It's his personal airplane. He wants his BFR, his biannual flight review. So every 2 years as a GA pilot, private pilot, you need to go up with an instructor and they need to sign you off that you're still doing things right and you're still safe, right? In order to keep your license current. So I said, sure, yeah, no problem. I have no problem doing that. So I walk over and talk to the mechanics. I said, hey, is the plane ready? And they said, yep, it's parked over there in front of the flight school on the T hangar there. Just go ahead and take it up. We test fluid and everything. The books are done. And I'm in the middle of writing the sign off right now. And I said, okay, is your signature and stamp on it? It's all good. He's like, yep, it's all good. I just have some documentation. I got to make photocopies and things like that. So you can wait for it or you can go up because it's fine. So we have a very good reputation at that time with the maintenance facility there. And I said, yeah, no problem. I'll go ahead and take him up. We'll knock this BFR out of the way and do it in his own airplane. So we walk over and he's doing his pre-flight. And I say, yeah, so how's it looking? All good? He's like, yep, pre-flight's all done. I'm like, okay, well, so I walk around the airplane one time, just give it a quick glance. And I think, it looks good. Nice brand new prop and brand new spinner on there. And in this old Mooney, it was polished metal, not even painted, just the end numbers. And I thought, man, this is cool. I haven't been in one of these before, at least not one this old. So we go up and we're in the south practice area there, south of Phoenix under the Bravo. And we're going through the usual maneuvers you would expect for a private pilot, biannual flight review, slow flight, stall recovery, steep turns around a point, S-turns, all those GA maneuvers, and I usually would just, if they were doing fine within the first few moments of the maneuver, I knew they had it. If they're struggling from the beginning, then I wanted to see more.
You can tell pretty quickly.
Yeah. We were doing this nonstop 2-3 times a day, right? So we're up there. He's in the middle of doing a maneuver, and I had brought my hood, view limiting device with me, and I said, all right, put this on, because he was an instrument rated pilot. I said, just show me that you're slow to this speed and intercept this radial and fly it outbound. And so I had him doing some slow flight radial interceptions. So he was doing it, and all of a sudden he says, something's wrong. Something's wrong. The engine's not. I have no power. I have full power. The engine's not power. He's getting nervous, and this guy's retired sheriff. They don't get nervous easily, right?
We hope not.
And so I see he's very nervous, and he's like, "Oh, I got a Squawk 7700, and I've got an emergency, and I 121.5. We're going to declare a mayday." I was like, "Hold on a second, there, buddy." I said, "This guy's like twice my age or 3 times my age." I was like, "Hold on a second, buddy. Come on." I'm like, "Let's aviate, then navigate, then communicate. Let's aviate. Just fly the airplane straight ahead. Pitch what speed you're going to pitch to." He's like, "Oh, okay." So I'm bringing him back into it. So I'm like, "Okay, we have an engine failure memory items in this aircraft. Do you not?" He says, "Oh yeah." I'm like, "What's the first thing?" "Mixture full rich." "Okay, go for it." So he puts it full rich. Still no response. It's just windmilling. And, we're starting a slow descent, maybe 800 feet a minute, straight ahead. Really nice. Best glide. Still had plenty of altitude. And I said, okay, what's the next thing? It's switch fuel tanks. So the second he reaches down on his side of the cockpit, there was the off, left, and right, right? So he goes from left to right. And the second he does that, here we go. He goes, "Oh, crap. And I look up, and the fuel gauges were actually in front of the right seat. And the whole flight, I mean, I checked them before we left. They were indicating about half a tank each. But from the minute we pushed off the hangar T parking spot, taxiing out, doing the mag check, doing the run up, everything, the whole time they were just like wiggling back and forth as the fuel was sloshing around in there with the movement of the aircraft. They're very sensitive for whatever reason. So now, here we are. We just ran through this procedure. We finished the procedure, and I look over, and the left tank is pegged 0. And I'm like, you did do a pre-flight, right? He goes, well, yeah. And he goes, I just put fuel in this thing like 4 days ago. I'm like, you topped it off 4 days ago? He's like, yeah. I'm like, before they put a new prop on it? He was like, well, yeah. And I go, well, didn't you check the tanks on the pre-flight before this flight and to get the levels? And he goes, well, I looked in there and it was fuel. I was like, okay, let's get the airplane back before we run out of fuel. On the other, we had been flying for like 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, I knew we more than likely had at least 30 minutes in the other tank too. So I think let's just head back to the airport, shall we? And he's like, the whole time he's just sweating. He's like, oh God, I failed this thing. And I'm like, it's not really a pass or fail. It's just you're not going to get signed off today, right? So he got nervous, but he came back into it, and I was like quizzing him the whole way back. I was like, I'm not letting up on this guy. I'm like, so what would you do if? He's like, oh, I would do this and that. Yeah, you're right. I got nervous. I'm like, okay. I said, but you might have passengers in here. You can't get nervous with or without passengers. You have to always have that mentality of, okay, something's wrong. Let's fix it. And logically, systematically. And he totally agreed. And I knew this guy, and my boss had vouched that he'd been flying for many, many years. And there's no way this guy was passing all those BFRs all those years. And now, he's going to. So I looked at him and I said, look, we're not going to do touch and goes. Normally I would, show me a couple landings. Just show me a good landing. And here's what's the situation. You have a 7-knot crosswind from the left. I want you to put the left main gear down on the beginning of the aiming point markers on the left side. I want the right main landing gear to touch down at the end of the paint prior to where there's no paint. And then I don't want the nose to touch down. I want you to hold it off until the first stripe past the aiming point markers. So I'm giving him like a really impossible feat to accomplish, which is this perfect landing with this perfect crosswind in a low wing Mooney. And wouldn't you know it, he made this perfect approach, landed exactly the way I requested. Touchdown, left main on the beginning of the paint, right main on the end of the paint. And I was like, damn, that's pretty good. I'm like, well, let's go tie it down. So we go tie it down, and I grab my kit bag and I go, all right, see you inside. And I just walk off and let him tie down the airplane. And my boss goes, how did it go? And I said, well, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass him because we had a little issue, but he handled everything perfectly up to that point, and he stumbled, but I'm satisfied that if it happened again, he's not going to make the same mistake, and he could fly that plane. He's good. His pre-flight stuff, we'll talk about it. It's a debrief. It's a debrief. So he's like, okay, but I'm going to make him sweat. And he goes, cool. So he comes in the office, and my boss goes, how'd you do? And he goes, I don't know. It just depends on this youngster if he's going to pass me. I don't think he's going to pass me. I'm like, well, how did you think you did? And he's like, well, I got a little nervous, but I won't make that same mistake. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. I said, you can fly your plane. I said, just review, practice, and so I signed him off.
The 2 takeaways from that story. First of all, Tony, what a slave driver instructor he is.
I was.
I want you to put this hood on, and then I want you to intercept this radial while doing slow flight, all simultaneously.
Well,
and then there's there is the age-old question about, should he have passed or should he not, of which I have no problem with him passing. I got nervous. But that's in the end, you had an unforeseen circumstance, but isn't that what we're training for? Is the unforeseen circumstance, and then to kind of, unfortunately, and I think this happens a lot. This is not him. This is not a knock on him at all. It kind of separates people from when those things do happen. And if he had been by himself because all it took was just you on that airplane. If he had taken that airplane up and it didn't happen to be time for his BFR,
yeah,
it begs the question, what would have happened?
He probably would have ended up in one of those rice fields or whatever, soybean fields that are south there.
South of the I-10.
He would have ended up in the field. I mean, he did everything correctly if the engine had failed and he couldn't get it back. He was doing everything right. But he had not, he jumped from point A to point D.
Yeah.
You know, like that. And it wasn't until I said, wait a minute. And then he started answering, like, oh, yeah, okay. And he did everything. So, you know, and that was probably out of all my sign-offs that I've ever had as a flight instructor, all those years ago, almost 20 years ago. That was the one where I could have gone either way. The rest of them were clear cut, but that one I could have gone either way. And yeah, I still stand behind it. I think, you know, he, in the end, who knows if he's still flying or even around anymore.
Sure.
But, you know, I felt confident that if anything were to happen after I signed him off, that the FAA would come to the instructor because they will go, well, you signed him off, you know, tell me about it, you know. That's your responsibility. I was supposed to hang on to those sign-offs for how many years? Do you remember?
I don't know. It was 3
like
or 5 or something.
3 or 4 years, 5 years. So, and I did, you know, and then.
Because I actually had that happen at Tailwind. I don't know if you ever knew that.
No, I didn't.
But, I did. It was a BFR for a guy whose name happened to also be Roger. It went fine. Nothing. I don't even remember the BFR because there was nothing remarkable about it. And it probably was 6 months later, and unfortunately it came to find out that the FAA came because they had found my name in his logbook for this VFR, and he had died in a plane crash.
Really?
Yep. He was going up. He was flying from the Phoenix area and was going up to somewhere in Utah, and somewhere over Zion National Park. Apparently, he was flying at night, and it looks like he got disoriented in BFR conditions with the horizon line or something at nighttime, and crashed.
Was it CFIT?
It was a CFIT event.
Huh.
And as part of that, going to what you're talking about, our names do show up in their logbooks, and there is that question. Like I say, I don't even remember the BFR, but my name was in his logbook.
Yeah.
The FAA did come knocking, and your example again is like you had no other issue signing anybody off, but how many of those other people had an unforeseen engine failure?
Yeah,
almost. And who's to say what any of those other people would do? And it's like I said, it's just an interesting question more than is there anything to take away or learn from it? No, I don't think so. It's just that interesting question, and as pilots, we can talk about it as much as we want, but when things go wrong, well, we know, I can tell you in the BFR, you do at least that hour of ground. Well, what are the memory items for an engine failure? Well, A, B, mixture, prop, throttle, right? Fuel in your fuel levers. But now it's actually happened for real, and it's very easy for that stuff in that example.
Yeah.
To kind of,
and you really don't know. I mean, you could be the most experienced pilot available, and
absolutely,
until that particular event happens to you
have no idea how you will respond.
Human reaction. And that's a controversy that doesn't just stop with GA or even corporate cargo or airlines. Anything you do, even not just aviation, you have no idea. You could be a police officer, you've trained at the academy, you're an expert at firearms, and until someone is pointing a gun at your head, and you have no idea how you're going to react. Yep. So, that is a very true statement. Absolutely. So that's why we train and train and train and train. And so you're constantly learning, you're constantly developing and adapting and learning your techniques. Do you have any other experiences in GA that you can think of?
Well, on a lighter note, since you kind of fessed up to yours was more your student. I'll blame this on my student too, and I'll let the listeners. I can let the listeners decide where they want to place blame for this one. This is kind of entertaining.
The blame always goes downhill, by the way, ladies and gentlemen.
So I was kind of going back to my earlier point. Maybe this story enhanced this viewpoint about how much scarier piston powered airplanes are than turbines, and So I had flown at the airlines, and I had gone back and I was teaching, and I was flying primarily King Airs and teaching King Airs, which is a turbine powered airplane. It's a turboprop for those of you who don't know a lot about the turboprop world. And it just so happened that there was a friend of a friend who was going to get back into flying, and she needed somebody to basically do some basic instruction. She was multi-engine instrument rated. And I mean, to get to a multi-engine instrument rating, you have to put the time in to a certain degree.
That's a minimum of 3 check rides, 3 ratings, 3 licenses.
Correct. Your private instrument and your multi. And I kind of made some assumptions that it had gone along with that. And she was very upfront that she wanted to get back into flying. She hadn't done a lot of flying. And the more important part of that was that while she had received those ratings, she had done the fast track program for all 3 of them. And
what's a fast track?
A fast track is sometimes we call them pilot mills, where you show up and they teach you what you need to do to pass the check ride. And for lack of better terms, that's it. I think you can do a multi. What can you do a multi-engine fast track program in 3 or 4 days now?
Oh, I don't know. Is it that? I went to. Well, did you go to the same flight school I did in Phoenix, North Deer Valley?
No, I did the ATP.
Oh, you did
program.
ATP, yeah, which is a far better program, I think, and I still to this day recommend ATP.
It was a pretty good program. I can kind of actually for me as a student, ATP was great.
Ah, good.
I did not instruct there on purpose, but we can get into that at a certain time or a later time. But I think you can do a multi-engine fast track in a few days. Now, the instrument and the private, they'll take you a little bit longer, but they're still, the basis hours. Is that they're going to get you in and get you out and teach you exactly what to know to pass the check ride, but then that's it. So she had got these ratings, but actually did not know a whole lot about how to fly. And then, combine that with the aspect that she hadn't flown in quite a while. And we're basically teaching a new student, which was fine. I went up and I flew the airplane because technically to get current in a single engine airplane, I had to go fly a single engine airplane. I took somebody up who was current. I tried to do this, fairly smart because I was now flying this piston powered airplane, and I get into the airplane, which is it was a Piper Aero retractable, the PA-28R. And there's not a lot of stuff on the flight deck, you would think, except when you haven't flown one in a while and you kind of look around and, well, there's a lot of things that, what do you mean there's only one attitude indicator? Because we get so used to having a bigger airplane where each pilot has their individual controls. But okay, I kind of figured this out, and we went up and flew around, and I did all the maneuvers to get fairly comfortable.
So you got current in the airplane.
So I got current, so I felt comfortable enough that if anything happened, I could fly the airplane, and I had no doubt about that. I mean, I'm not going to go up with myself, let alone with somebody else, if I'm not to that point. But anyway, so the time came, we got her set up, we found a time that worked for us, and we showed up at the airport. We pre-flight the airplane, we get into the airplane, and she's in the left seat, and we're going to start up the airplane, and I walk her through, because it was a fuel injected airplane, walk her through the starting procedure, which was my first clue that this was going to be exciting, and
to say the least.
we start the engine, and we start rolling forward. And it just so happens in this particular airplane, most airplanes have rudder pedals on both sides, which this plane did. However, on the right side where I was seated as the instructor, there was rudder pedals, but there were no brakes. There was no toe brakes.
Right.
It was just a thin bar of rudder, and we're rolling forward, and she cannot find the brakes. She cannot find the toe brakes. Apparently the parking brake did not work,
but toe brakes, every aircraft, whether you have only on one side or they're so the rudder pedals are multifunctional. For those of you that don't fly regularly in a GA aircraft or even airline aircraft, no different. you have toe brakes, meaning the pedals go left and right, move left and right, right? Or you push forward on the left pedal, push forward on the right pedal, and
Sure.
they're linked. Okay, now the brakes, you move your toes forward, push forward on the pedals, and they tilt forward, and that's brakes. On an airplane, you brake with your toe brakes.
And you have a left brake on that left pedal, so you can actually get differential braking as well.
So yeah, you can brake left side, right side, and make really sharp turns. Now, no matter what airplane, her very first flight, hour one
is one thing.
Okay, that's one thing. But even then, that airplane had toe brakes, and probably in both
same
sides.
Spot. And I made that assumption that, who would have thought that I would have had to go over the position of the brakes on an aircraft? But so we start rolling forward, and I have no brakes, and so I do. Okay, things are now going sideways. We are now taxiing into a hangar. Now, fortunately, we probably had about 100 feet, I would guess. So it wasn't exactly close, but things are bad. And what am I going to do? And so I pulled the mixture. And so the mixture is basically a gas cutoff, a fuel cutoff. And so I pulled this, in which the engine then died, and we stopped rolling.
Oh my God.
Meanwhile, we look. My heart's going pretty fast at this point because I can't believe that this just happened. And I look up, and there's some maintenance guys over by the hangar that, again, they're still 100 feet away or so, but you can see them pointing and laughing at us, of which I'm a little bit embarrassed
probably
at this
hear
point.
you yelling, brakes, brakes, brakes.
So there we were. All right, let's try this again. So we started this again, and the exact same thing happens. She still cannot find the brakes, even though after we've now covered this. And I again shut the mixture off, and it's time for plan B at this point, because obviously at this point this is not going to work the way that we thought it should. And to get her back up in the airplane, we decided, here's what we'll do, is that I will go sit in the left seat and she'll sit in the right seat, and I'll just take you up. I will fly the airplane. You can just sit there and relax. Maybe I'll give you the controls later on, but let's just go for a flight and calm you down. Because obviously this was fairly traumatic when you are pointed at a hangar and you can't figure out how to stop the airplane.
Yeah. So give her the experience of
right. Just to, let's try and make this a good experience. And so we get out, both of us get out of the airplane. The Piper actually only gets out on one side of the aircraft. It's not like a Cessna where you each have your own door.
That's the right side.
On the right side, correct? And then you climb down the wing. So we both get out of the airplane, and then we both get back in the airplane. I get in first this time to go sit in the left seat where I can find the brake pedals, which did work, by the way. And I start up the airplane, and we go taxiing out, and we're just going to go on a leisurely flight. And we take off, and we stay under the Bravo, and we're going to go to another towered airport.
Yeah.
And we're going to just do a landing, and then we're going to do a full stop landing. We're going to taxi back and basically fly back. Which was all going just fine until I contacted the tower. And as I was contacting the tower and keying the mic, I kind of noticed things were not quite right. And then the screens started to flicker as well. Now, this particular airplane, most Pipers, or maybe almost every Piper, but this particular Piper had a glass cockpit in it.
Versus a 6-pack.
Versus a conventional 6-pack.
Yeah, the dials and whatnot.
Which means that it's a TV screen for all intents and purposes, which is electrically powered.
Yes.
So we're flying along. The radio's doing some funny things. I couldn't really put my finger on it at the time. And then these TV screens, or this glass cockpit that have all the engine instruments, start flickering. They're kind of going on and off. Well, this is kind of odd, but I have now contacted the tower. I actually got clearance to land from the tower. And as I went to go key the mic, keying the mic did not work.
So they told you,
we
Piper, you're clear to land, and you went to go
land, runway 24. And I went to key the mic to confirm that I had received and acknowledged that I had gotten the clearance to land. Sure. And the mic would not transmit. And in the glass cockpit, you can actually see a TX next to it to show, so you don't hear it in the headset, you don't see it on the panel, and then the airplane went dark.
Oh shit.
So now I've received clearance to land. I was probably on about a 3-mile final, And I now have no engine instruments. I have no radio. I have no anything.
Well, the engines are running because they have the magnetos that are generating power for the spark plugs and the ignition and all that stuff.
It's independent of the battery and the rest of the electrical system.
Yeah.
So there I am, and we're going to just go land as normal. I had technically received my clearance to land, even if I had not read it back. And then I don't even know how it came to me, but in the debacle on the ground from this brake process, I all of a sudden had this thought that while most airplanes, GA airplanes, small GA airplanes have a rocker switch for the battery master, which is actually a 2-part switch. And one side is the battery master and one is the switch for the alternator. Except when they had redone this particular airplane with the glass cockpit, they had 2 separate and independent switches for the battery and the alternator. And all of a sudden it hit me that after this mess on the ground, I had turned the battery switch on. But as a dumb turbine pilot who is used to generators, I had failed to turn the alternator on, which means that basically I was running the entire airplane off of the battery and there was no alternator to charge the battery.
So you're pulling charge but not giving it.
And I had killed the battery with my glass cockpit and all these electronic instruments. And as soon as I hit the alternator, everything came back on immediately. We landed the airplane. I read back to the tower. I said, hey, we had a problem with the radio. And I did get the clearance to land and everything's fine.
Yeah.
And we landed without incident. And then we taxied back and my poor student is white as a ghost. I then find out on the ground that, again, only one door in this airplane. I find out that she has not actually gotten the door completely locked. The door was closed and it was latched and you couldn't push it open, but there was a big gap at the top of the door, which I kind of wondered. It seemed a little loud in there. Yeah. So the door is not actually closed. Come to find out that the latch needed some work on it, but we still got to get the plane back. My poor student was about ready to quit.
Oh no.
And in the end, as the instructor, those things are or in this case my responsibility. And this is a short story about how, I guess, going back from a turbine powered airplane to a piston powered airplane and the responsibilities that come with even flying a little Piper Arrow with a student who might not be quite up to speed.
Right. I mean, I can remember when I was starting out as a flight instructor and my wife looked at me and said, all right, we got a baby on the way. You're going to be flying students around in piston powered airplanes in practice areas doing maneuvers. And you're going to be doing one of the most dangerous jobs, second only to Alaskan ice fishermen or whatever. You're getting life insurance. And she goes, and your policy better be
smart choice.
Big. And so it's like, oh, come on, really? Do I need life insurance? Yes. You are not allowed to do a single flight as an instructor until you show me you have life insurance, because I'll be damned if you're going to go up there with a student who's, basically trying to kill you. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. So I ended up getting life insurance. And to this day, I still have it. and sure enough, I did a little bit of homework on it and realized that GA flight instructor jobs are the second most dangerous job. I thought for sure police officer, narcotics agent, all this. Nope. GA flight instructor. Why? Because everybody's trying to kill you.
Yeah, because everyone's trying to kill you. The airplane's trying to kill you. The students are trying to kill you. And you do this all at an altitude of what? When you think that 5,000 feet is way up there in the sky.
Yeah. And it's nothing.
It's nothing.
That can go away real quick. Yeah.
Which is probably why, that life insurance for a pilot is also, you pay a premium for that as well.
Absolutely.
For those reasons.
And then when I no longer was flight instructing, because I was working for a regional airline, and for my particular case, I was a new hire at a new job at a regional airline at the same time that I was supposed to be renewing my flight instructor certificate. And the way you can do it is you can go online and pay money for a course, and you do this course online. And at the end of it, if you pass everything, congratulations, you have another 2 years of flight instructor certificate that it's valid for. And here I was starting a new school, learning a new aircraft, a jet, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do all this. I don't want to take away from my experience at my airline. And my wife looked at me and said, "Are you ever going to flight instruct again?" I said, "Well, not if I don't have to. I mean, I enjoyed it. I absolutely loved it. I still talk to some of my students and have conversations with them and follow their journey. And I absolutely was a great time in my career. However, no, I don't want to be in a small airplane if I don't have to be. And thank you very much, because although it was fun, I've been there, done that. I'm moving forward." She was like, "Well, then just let it go." I was like, "Well, you know how many thousands of dollars those flight instructor ratings cost us? I mean, that's money that," she's like, "but you can always get them back, right? And it's not going to cost you those same thousands." Like, well, no, I could probably go and do some studying and get an endorsement. Once you're with an airline and you're captain somewhere, you pretty much can go up and just maybe get 10, 15 hours in a GA airplane.
Still got to take the check ride.
Well, you go take the check ride with, somebody that knows you fly for a mainline and carry. And it's kind of an unspoken thing. Well, as long as you know how to teach and you've got all the lesson plans down, you got a source of lesson plans, and you can go through that, then fine, you're great. And so I let it go. And you know what? I don't think I'll do it again.
Did you let it go?
I let it go, 15 years ago.
Oh, I just renewed mine in October.
Did you?
I did.
And how did you do that? Through the American Flyers, or?
Yeah, I have the American Flyers flight instructor renewal for life that I paid for back at the same time, when we were instructing. And I decided that, well, it's the same thing that you just said, except I decided that in order to not have to jump through those hoops, although I'm completely with you, is that if I do not have to ever do that again, yes, please. Yeah. I won't. But it's a lot easier to renew it. It's not that hard of a process. The hardest part is that you have to make an appointment. I choose to make an appointment with the feds, and I go down to the FSDA, so I have to go visit them every other year.
Yeah. So you do the course online,
it's 100% online. I paid once. It's a lifetime course, and I have my flight instructor certificate that is still active, and also a little bit different than what you would necessarily think about. It's also a little bit of an added benefit for me for what I do in the corporate side, because there are jobs that are out there for private owners who sometimes actually one of the requirements is that, or a preference at least, is that they have a valid
CFI,
flight instructor, a valid flight instructor certificate.
Sure.
And so it kind of bolsters the resume a little bit.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've given it about an hour of GA and emergency procedures, and we've kind of run the gamut of what it's like to be on this side, on the instructor side, those experiences with emergencies. We've talked a little bit about emergencies when you're in the bubble of a legacy carrier or regional carrier or even a corporate world, and how that differs. In the corporate world, where it's a little bit more, you're an independent thinker. I mean, you're responsible for so much more than just flying the plane and running a checklist. You're doing a lot. You're taking care of everything from making sure there's fresh ice on the aircraft for your clients, to cleaning the airplane, to doing the flight plans and checking the weather. And God, do you even call 1-800-weather brief anymore? Or how do you check the weather?
Have you ever heard of flightplan.com?
No.
Oh, great program. Flightplan.com will pretty much do anything and everything that you want. Files your flight plans for you. It'll give you weather briefs. If you go with some of the premium plans, not that I work for flightplan.com at all, but great program. It'll actually do your EAPIS. You can do EAPIS through it on the premium program for customs. But that's where we pretty much do almost everything is through that program.
And do you get that real time in the airplane too with an EFB, or is it only on the ground?
If you have an internet connection, there's an app. So there's a couple different ways you can go through it. We do everything or I'll do everything on the ground with a Wi-Fi connection. If you've got Wi-Fi in the airplane, which we actually do, it's got full functionality.
So you can update and refile.
You could
live.
Update. Actually, just last week, we were flying to a state, and I hadn't thought about it ahead of time, and I didn't have current plates for Nevada. I was going to Vegas.
Ooh,
and I was on the airplane, and I updated and downloaded the plates for Vegas right there from the airplane
while en route. That's great.
Yep. But there's also an app that you can use on. So I have an iPad. I've got the app on the iPad, and you can download all your plates, and it's available offline. It basically will act as a EFB, an electronic flight bag for you. It'll do performance for all the airplanes, so it gives you pretty accurate times, the fuel numbers, and you can change all of it as well. If you want to do trend monitoring for your airplane, you'll get fuel numbers that are spot on, flight times that are spot on.
Oh, wow.
It's very little thinking on our part now.
Yeah. So, hey, more like what the airline world's like, I guess.
Very much, except we just have to do it ourselves, which, I mean, I can go and I can file a flight plan in 20 seconds.
Nice.
And so it works really well.
No more facsimiles with the surface analysis charts.
And no more 1-800-WX briefs.
Yeah, and talk to a real meteorologist will tell you, well, over in the south of your flight plan, they do show a low pressure system that, you're like, oh, God, can you please pick it up? Those days. Oh, by the way, for millennials, a facsimile is a transmission of data or a page of information that you transmit through a fax machine via a phone line. Yes, and it's a digital transmission, real high tech. Yeah, a little bit before your time, I guess. I was flying with a pilot the other day, and the other day, years ago, and young FO shows up in his 20s, great, had all the stuff he needed, his EFB, knew how to do all that stuff, and I said, well, remember back in the day when we had, paper Jepsons, and we had to, come in like 30 minutes before your show time and make sure you got the current plates, and he's like, what?
He had never done paper jet revisions?
Never, and he was an airline pilot.
Oh my goodness. Maybe I am.
I was like, wait a minute, you don't ever? He goes, I've never done paper Jepsons. I always had my electronic. I had ForeFlight. I was like, oh, you did all your aviation from GA from day one using ForeFlight electronic. He goes, yeah. I'm like, how many years ago were you in GA? He was like, 3 years ago. I'm like, and you're flying for an airline? Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a whole other topic about how those, because I knew a guy that was associated with Embry-Riddle, and apparently those guys go in there now, and all their stuff is glass cockpit. Either 172s,
G1000s, yeah.
Yeah, they're G1000s. You go all the way up to the airline, doing the airline route, and you've never seen a steam gauge in your life.
Yeah. And actually, I remember having a conversation with a DE that we had at the flight school before I left, and they were talking about getting some kind of supplemental rating where if you got instrument rated on glass cockpit, that you couldn't fly steam gauges instrument IFR until you got the supplement to prove that you could actually get a scan going, because they were going from all glass all the time, and then they go, I got an airplane over here. You want to fly it? IFR? Sure. They get in their steam gauges and they have no idea how to do a scan.
As dumb as that sounds, that is probably a safe and great idea.
I mean, eventually I could see a time where you would need to be typed in an airplane, GA airplane, that had these antique steam gauges, because everything will eventually be glass, a bombardment of information. But yeah, I think the basic skills are absolutely something that you should have at least 10 to 15 hours minimum under the hood or in IMC conditions, developing a scan before you go to the luxury of a glass cockpit.
It's amazing how much, you've been flying glass for a while. Also, they present it to you in what, a 6x6 area.
Right. Yeah.
And now all of a sudden where you've got 6 different instruments, and it is a completely, just as a side note, when I did my Falcon 50 type rating, I probably shouldn't even admit this. So I did my 50 type rating, and then when we flew the airplane, and the simulator where we took the type rating had a a combined attitude indicator and airspeed indicator.
Okay.
And the actual airplane, it was a standard 6-pack, which means that the airspeed indicator was a separate instrument. And the first time I flew that airplane, we were in the air and probably at 1,500 feet before I had even recognized or realized that I had never even looked at the airspeed indicator, because I didn't realize that it wasn't on.
Wasn't where it's supposed to be.
It wasn't where it was supposed to be with the simulator training that I had done, transitioning from the simulator to the actual aircraft. I was like, holy crap. I've just taken off in a 3-engine jet. I'm doing 220 knots. And this was the first time I'd ever actually even realized that it wasn't where I thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And these are the little gotchas, little nuances of this career. It's so technical and so mundane little details that will get you. Absolutely will get you.
In a hurry.
Yeah. Well, hey, Roger, I just got to say thank you so much for coming down to the studio and spending some time with me. I really enjoy it and look forward to having these conversations again in the future. So if you're listening to the Squawk Ident and you would like to send us some feedback, comments, critiques, or anything in regards to any of the topics that we discussed, or you would like to hear some topics that we did not discuss, feel free to send us a line by visiting either www.aviatortony.com. That's Alpha Victor, the number 8, R Romeo Tango Oscar November Yankee.com. And from there, you can see episode audio files that'll take you right to the Anchor website or app. And you can also see the unique cover art that I do my best to create for every episode. Also, from there, you can send us feedback and make contributions to the website. Again, this is Aviator Tony. On behalf of Captain Roger, I'd like to thank you for listening to Squawk Ident. And remember, keep the dirty side down, take care of yourself, and take care of each other.